Hi, my name is Jen Dabina, and I'm a museum educator at the National Museum of the United States Army. Thank you for joining us today for our history talk, Honor and Fidelity, Puerto Rico's Borinqueneers. Today we're going to learn more about the 65th Infantry Regiment, also known as the Borinqueneers, an all-Puerto Rican regiment that served from just after the Spanish-American War through the Korean War. We will be exploring the challenges, sacrifices, and commitments of the Borinqueneers and understand the impact of their service on Puerto Ricans on the island of Puerto Rico and the mainland. In doing so, we will see how military service has often been used to expand civil rights and citizenship. First, take a look at the images on your screen. Look closely. What symbols do you notice? Does anything stand out to you? On the right, you can see a portrait of what is meant to be a fictional soldier. To the side, there are three soldiers who appear to be traversing rocky ground in an inverted V position. They are meant to be taking the high ground and have their bayonets fixed. There is also the crossed rifle insignia that is traditionally associated with the infantry, and the words 65th Infantry Regiment and the unit's nickname, the Borinqueneers, at the bottom. On the left is what might look like a castle. It is the Castillo San Felipe del Morro, which is located in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It is a 16th century citadel and is the preferred military command ceremonial site for the 65th. There is also the Maltese Cross, which is the unit's insignia, as well as an olive branch, commonly known as the symbol of peace. And at the top are the words Honor et Fidelis, which translates to Honor and Fidelity, which is the unit's motto. This is the Congressional Gold Medal issued to the 65th Infantry Regiment in 2016. The Congressional Gold Medal is the highest civilian award bestowed by the United States Congress. It is awarded to persons or groups whose achievements have made major or long-standing impacts on American history and culture. The symbolism you noticed on the medal captures many of the sentiments that we are going to be talking about today. The patriotism and honor of the Borinqueneers and their accomplishments and sacrifices during World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. We will also explore how, like those soldiers surging forward on the rocky ground on the medal, the Borinqueneers also fought an uphill battle against racism and prejudice to prove themselves in battle and as Americans. To understand how the 65th Infantry was created, we need to go back to the war with Spain in 1898. To start, take a look at the political cartoon on your screen. What do you notice? What's happening here? In this cartoon, Uncle Sam is depicted seated at the table with empty plates all around him. On the floor is an expansion menu that lists Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines as entrees. In the doorway are anti-expansionists holding Horace Prescription and Brian's Remedy. The words Uncle Sam, you're too slow, I've eaten already are written below the picture. The Spanish-American War is often referred to as the Splendid Little War. The United States declared war on Spain on April 25, 1898, and just a few months later, representatives of Spain and the United States signed the Treaty of Paris. The treaty established the independence of Cuba, ceded Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States, and allowed the United States to purchase the Philippines for $20 million. The acquisition of these territories and America's new colonial empire sparked debate at home, led by anti-expansionist Republican Senator George Hoar and anti-imperialist Democrat William Jennings Bryan, which explains the canisters in the political cartoon. Now, following the treaty, those living on the island of Puerto Rico came under the jurisdiction of the United States, but they were not U.S. citizens. The U.S. War Department established the Department of Puerto Rico to administer and oversee the island, and American officials determined that a standing military was needed for peacekeeping. And the military's role included the persecution of evildoers, the capture of fugitives, and the preservation of public order. Rather than permanently stationing large numbers of American troops in Puerto Rico, Congress authorized the formation of the Puerto Rican Battalion of Volunteer Infantry on March 2, 1899. By the end of its first year, the unit proved so effective that the Army decided to expand the unit and authorized an additional mounted battalion. Military service had other benefits too, as illustrated in the quote from Puerto Rico's Governor Charles Allen. Writing to Eli Root, who was the Secretary of War at the time, Allen wrote, "Military service has undoubtedly been a very potent education influence. Each man of the battalion will be a committee in himself to spread among the natives stories of American prestige. The soldiers feel pride in their service, and there is an undoubted stimulant by it toward general loyalty." So in this quote, we can see that military service was seen as a tool to instill patriotism and loyalty among Puerto Ricans towards their new country. Coinciding with increased military service was the passage of the 4-Acre Act. The act ended military rule on the island and designated it as an unorganized territory. A civilian government with a governor and executive council that was appointed by the President of the United States was also established. And while the act made Puerto Ricans American nationals and put federal laws into effect on the island, statehood and citizenship were not yet granted. Puerto Ricans, though, continued to enlist in the military. In 1908, the Puerto Rico Provisional Regiment of Infantry was officially inducted into the regular army by an act of Congress, making it just the Puerto Rico Regiment of Infantry. This transition was more than just a formality. It was indicative of both the regiment and the island's growing importance to the United States. The infantry regiment had evolved from a peacekeeping force into a regular unit responsible for guarding the nation's key Atlantic approaches. On the eve of World War I, Puerto Rican citizenship status changed. The Jones Act, passed in 1917, gave statutory citizenship to any island resident born after April 25, 1898. In describing the legislation, Representative Horace M. Towner of Iowa said, "We are conferring on them what they ought to have had years ago, the privilege of being American citizens and being placed under the protection of our flag." On the heels of the Jones Act, the Selective Service Act of 1917 followed. The act permitted the U.S. to expand the military through the conscription of young male citizens. As newly designated citizens, Puerto Ricans were required to register for the draft. During World War I, mainland Puerto Ricans were drafted, recruited, or volunteered for service. Soldiers from the Puerto Rican Infantry Regiment were sent to the recently completed Panama Canal to prevent the Central Powers from using it to fight the Allies. Aside from the infantry regiment, approximately 18,000 Puerto Rican men reported for service elsewhere in the Army. However, Puerto Rican soldiers were kept from combat roles. This followed traditional American military policies, which restricted non-white soldiers from combat. In World War II, the 65th Infantry was once again deployed to the Panama Canal Zone in 1943. Their mission included protecting vital installations in the Canal Zone and manning observation points on both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. However, with casualties rising in Italy and preparations underway for a European invasion, the 65th deployed to Europe in 1944. Once overseas, the unit served mostly in support capacities, protecting roads, railheads, and supply depots, and airfields from attack by the enemy. However, in early winter 1944, the 3rd Battalion saw combat in the Maritime Alps. There, their mission was to provide early warning should the German army in Italy attack. Throughout November and December, German forces conducted small-scale ambushes and assaults against the 65th Infantry. Each time, Puerto Ricans held the line, preventing a German attack. Although the infantry's time in combat was brief, its brave soldiers earned Distinguished Service Crosses, 2 Silver Stars, and numerous Bronze and Purple Hearts. Following the drawdown in Europe, the 65th Infantry returned to Puerto Rico. The regiment regularly took part in training exercises and often received training opportunities denied to many stateside units because of their location and strategic importance. During this time, they were assigned a new commander, Colonel William Harris. Harris, a long-serving veteran of World War II, was initially unhappy with this assignment. Harris recalled, "I was outraged at what I considered being sent to pasture for 2 years to assume command what the Pentagon brass referred to as a rum and Coca-Cola outfit. Going to the West Indies to command the Puerto Rican regiment was not my idea of either where or how to prove my command." Shortly, Harris and Army senior leadership would have that characterization challenged. In 1950, the 65th Infantry took part in Operation Portex, short for the Puerto Rican exercise. It took place on a small island off the east coast of Puerto Rico, Vieques. In the simulation, the U.S. Army forces were tasked with liberating the Vieques Island from an aggressive force. The 65th were cast as the aggressor soldiers stationed on the island. The 65th were to pretend they had captured Vieques and defend it against the Army liberators. The liberators were portrayed by the 3rd Infantry Division, which was considered to be the best combat division in the Army at the time. During the operation, the 65th halted the landings of the 3rd Division on the beaches of Vieques and inflicted heavy casualties on a battalion of 82nd Airborne jumping onto the island. In fact, the simulation was paused multiple times because it was deemed the 65th's defenses were too strong. It was determined that the 3rd Infantry Division would not have been able to land on the beaches based on the performance of the 65th. So the exercises would pause for a few hours to give soldiers time to land on the beaches, and then they would resume. The performance of the 65th showed that the soldiers were well trained and could be just as successful in combat as any other soldiers from some of the most elite regiments in the Army. As captured by Colonel Harris, their performance proved that the Puerto Ricans could hold their own against the best trained soldiers that the U.S. Army could put into the field. This maneuver marked them ready for deployment, and as one of the superior combat regiments in the U.S. Army at the time. What the regiment didn't know was that they'd receive the chance to prove themselves in combat shortly. On June 25, 1950, the North Korean People's Army invaded South Korea with political and financial support from the Soviet Union and China. The United Nations condemned the attack and called for international support for South Korea. The United Nations authorized the creation of the United Nations Command to respond to the invasion. As the largest member, the United States led the UN forces and provided the majority of the military personnel and equipment. Just a few months later, the 65th was alerted for overseas movement and attached to the 3rd Infantry Division. The regiment was approved for 4,000 soldiers and quickly recruited enough soldiers to be brought up to full strength within 10 days. There was so much enthusiasm that they created new training facilities on the island to train the overflow for eventual replacements. On August 27, 1950, the 65th sailed out of San Juan. The men trained extensively en route, firing all of their weapons from the ship. The soldiers practiced cleaning, assembling, and caring for weapons. They executed marksmanship exercises, conducted bayonet training, and practiced organizing and training the mortar company. During the boat ride, they officially adopted the name Borinqueneers. The first word, Borinquen, is Taino, for the native peoples who inhabited the Caribbean. The second word, Buccaneer, is the name for Spanish sea pirates who sailed the Caribbean. Combined, the name reflected both the men's ancestry and their determination in battle. The Borinqueneers arrived in Pusan on September 23, 1950, and were immediately put into combat and took part in operations to expand the UN forces' position outside the Pusan perimeter. The regiment quickly made a name for themselves as they helped the Army push the North Koreans back towards the 38th parallel. Their achievements caught the attention of many, including General Douglas MacArthur, who said of the regiment in 1950, showing magnificent ability and courage in field operations, "They are a credit to Puerto Rico, and I am proud to have them in my command." In November 1950, the regiment moved north and assisted with the withdrawal of the 1st Marine Division from the Chosin Reservoir after the Chinese entered the war. The Borinqueneers defended the Hungnam beachhead while UN forces evacuated from northeastern Korea. Back home, the Charleston Gazette summarized their service. From all reports, this regiment distinguished itself above and beyond the call of duty in the bitter fighting which preserved the beachhead and made possible the redeployment of the 10th Corps. The men of the 65th Infantry Regiment are worthy of all the fine things that have been said about them. A salute to American fighting men. For the next year, the regiment participated in Operation Thunderbolt and Exploitation. By the end of 1951, the unit was considered one of the strongest regiments in the division. The officers and men of the regiment earned 4 Distinguished Service Crosses and 125 Silver Stars that year. The regiment was again singled out by General MacArthur, who characterized their service, saying, "The Puerto Ricans, forming the ranks of the gallant 65th Infantry, give daily proof on the battlefield of Korea of the courage, determination, and resolute will to victory. Their invincible loyalty to the United States and their fervent devotion to those immutable principles of human relations which the Americans of the continent and Puerto Rico have in common." One of those soldiers who embodied the courage, determination, and resolute will to victory was Modesto Cartagena. Cartagena joined the 65th Infantry Regiment in 1941 during World War II, where he was awarded the Bronze Star for his service in several campaigns in Europe. He re-enlisted in the Army in June 1950 upon the outbreak of war in Korea. In April 1951, elements of the 65th participated in a series of counter-offensives in enemy territory in North Korea. One of the objectives was taking Hill 206. As Cartagena and his company approached the hill, enemy machine gun emplacements opened fire. With his fellow soldiers pinned down, he charged the enemy positions by himself. Under heavy fire, he destroyed one enemy emplacement with a grenade before silencing the other with his firearm. As Cartagena himself remembered, the Chinese would hurl their grenades at me, and I would catch them in the air and quickly throw them through the air opening in the Chinese trenches. They would take cover and I would advance my position. And that's how I destroyed a Chinese position that was nearby. He continued to assault enemy positions by himself until wounded by enemy fire and grenades. His bravery saved the lives of his fellow soldiers. In all, Cartagena destroyed 5 enemy positions, killing over 40 enemy soldiers. His actions earned him the nickname One Man's Army, as well as the Distinguished Service Cross. After 60 days in the hospital, he returned to duty and served until he retired from the Army in 1971. Back at home, the courage and determination of the Borinqueneers impacted Puerto Ricans both on the island and the mainland. Daily, island newspapers were filled with stories and pictures of soldiers. Island-wide, the people of Puerto Rico joined to support the regiment. The unit's crest was displayed on buses and train cars. Plazas and avenues were named to honor the regiment. Soldiers were paid to endorse local products. They became a national icon on the island and the Puerto Rican community off on the mainland. Those sentiments are captured in this quote from a soldier who told Stars and Stripes, "We are proud to be part of the United Nations forces, and we are proud of our country. We are glad for the chance to fight the communists and also for the chance to put Puerto Rico on the map. It will be a great accomplishment if we can raise the prestige of our country in the eyes of the world." Starting in 1952, things began to change for the Borinqueneers and the Army as an organization. First, there was the strategic situation. The first 12 months of the Korean War was characterized by dramatic changes in the battlefront, with armies sweeping up and down the Korean peninsula. The War of Movement virtually ended in July 1951, when peace negotiations started. For the soldiers at the front and the people back home, negotiations raised hopes that the war would soon be over. The new strategic situation meant that holding ground became incredibly important. While soldiers were permitted to withdraw their position when it was no longer tenable, they were required to launch a counterattack at the first opportunity to regain lost ground. A report from the 1st Commonwealth Division captured this policy, stating that there was a strong tendency to feel that the retention of an American outpost is a matter of honor, and to insist that it shall be defended to the last man and the last round, regardless of its tactical significance. The hope that fighting would be over soon, combined with this change in tactic, led to low morale among all troops in Korea, including the Borinqueneers. In addition to a stalemated war and low morale, the 65th also suffered from manpower challenges. During the first 6 months of 1952, the regiment lost a total of 5,297 battle-hardened and experienced soldiers, but only gained 3,825 new recruits. Rotations on such a massive scale gutted units of experienced leaders and soldiers, rendered effective training almost impossible, and undermined unit cohesion. Those rotated in were often inexperienced, with many having just enlisted and few spoke English. On the other hand, officers rotating in were continental and spoke no Spanish, and did not have proven experience leading soldiers in a combat zone. Most new troops who arrived in Korea in 1952 had been in service no more than 6 to 7 months prior to deployment. These manpower challenges impacted unit leadership. Due to the shortages, there weren't enough non-commissioned officers, so company commanders were forced to assign inexperienced privates to leadership positions that were normally reserved for more senior staff. These problems of rotation, leadership, and the strategic situation would come to a head in fall 1952. That September, elements of the 65th Infantry were stationed at Outpost Kelly, one of many outposts on the front along the border between North and South Korea. That month, Chinese forces had become increasingly aggressive for various points of high ground. They were intent on improving their position before the onset of winter, because they wanted to bring extra pressure to UN negotiators. To secure the desired terrain, the Chinese and North Korean forces were aggressive in trying to push off Army soldiers who were stationed on the outpost line. On September 17th, the Chinese attacked the soldiers stationed at Outpost Kelly from 3 directions. They quickly overtook the position. During the ambush, Colonel Cordero de Villa, the regimental commander, was reluctant to call in artillery fire or commit reserve battalions, citing the need to protect evacuating soldiers from friendly fire. 2 days later, on September 19th, the 65th organized a counterattack and were able to initially overtake the hill, but were repulsed by evening. They tried again the next day, but were repulsed by a Chinese counterattack. On September 24th, the regiment launched what they hoped would be a final counterattack, but that too failed. During the attack, Chinese artillery and mortar fire caused widespread confusion and panic. By the end of the month, Outpost Kelly remained in enemy hands. The Borinqueneers weren't the only regiment to suffer setbacks in September. However, Outpost Kelly was the only outpost that remained in Chinese hands at the end of the month. The 65th were pulled from the front for retraining to remedy what Army senior leaders called a regression in combat fitness. Colonel Chester de Gavre was assigned to command the regiment. De Gavre immediately instituted new policies and training for the 65th. De Gavre recalled, "The first thing I decided to do was shape this outfit up. They all had long hair, they all had mustaches and beards, and I said, this has got to end right now." Well, that didn't sit well at all. The order provoked a strong reaction from the men, which they believed suggested the new commander lacked cultural sensitivity. As one soldier recounted, "I objected. Placing in doubt a soldier's manhood was, in my opinion, the ultimate insult." De Gavre also ordered the removal of the Borinqueneers insignia from regimental vehicles and ended the inclusion of traditional Puerto Rican dishes from Army-issued rations. Altogether, these policies had a serious impact on the morale of soldiers in the unit. If put in the soldier's shoes, how would this make you feel? 1 month later, the regiment found itself back on the front lines at Jackson Heights, a mountain of solid rock located more than a mile forward from the front line. Captain Jackson of G Company described the outpost. The outpost was located in the midst of Chinese territory. There was scarcely a spot in it that was covered by constant enemy observation. And you can see Jackson Heights in the image on your screen, labeled Hill 391 near the bottom. On October 25th, the Chinese began a near constant shelling of the outpost. By October 27th, casualties began to overwhelm the men stationed at the outpost. Chinese shells hit the company's ammunition supply, destroying most of it and severing all wire communications. That evening, the company's listening post detected large numbers of enemy troops positioning themselves to the east and the west. 2 hours later, the Chinese unleashed an immense artillery and mortar barrage that overpowered the defenders and led to a retreat by Company G. The soldiers galvanized 2 counterattacks that ultimately failed to regain the outpost. Due to the inability of the regiment to retake the hill, they were pulled from the front line. This time, even harsher punishment was inflicted on the regiment. The reputation of the regiment and its Puerto Rican soldiers was shattered beyond repair after Jackson Heights. A total of 123 Puerto Rican soldiers, including 1 officer, were ordered court-martialed for refusing to attack the enemy as ordered and misbehavior before the enemy. First Lieutenant Juan Guzman was the first tried for mass combat refusal and was the only officer brought up on charges. While Guzman had a long Army career, he had only been in Korea 10 days when he found himself as the second in command at Jackson Heights. Jackson Heights was also his first combat experience. Guzman's trial began on November 23, 1953. He pleaded guilty to willfully failing to obey the order of a superior officer and not guilty to willfully failing to engage the enemy. He was found guilty of the first charge and sentenced to dismissal from service with total forfeiture of all pay and allowances and confinement to 5 years of hard labor. In all, 103 enlisted members of the regiment were charged for offenses committed at Jackson Heights. Of these, 5 were acquitted and 8 had charges against them dismissed. While these proceedings took place, the Army kept them quiet. It wasn't until January 1953 when relatives of soldiers brought the story to the press. Soldiers' families wrote letters to the President and Congress demanding a review of their children's service and allow them the opportunity to prove themselves once again on the battlefield. The Army conducted a review of the sentences, and in July 1953, the Secretary of the Army, Robert Stevens, moved to overturn the sentences. Clemency was granted to 56 of the convicted soldiers. By 1954, all those sentenced received clemency or pardons, and the majority returned to service in the Army. While the court-martial proceedings took place, the Department of the Army reconstituted the regiment as a fully integrated regiment. This meant that non-Puerto Rican personnel were assigned in the same proportion as other regiments to the unit. The newly reconstituted 65th entered combat on May 12, 1953 at Outpost Kelly, 2 miles southeast of Jackson Heights. The regiment participated in 5 major actions and showed no hesitation during offensive operations. They held their group and counterattacked at the soonest opportunity. The regiment remained in Korea through the autumn of 1954, providing border security. They returned to Puerto Rico and were greeted by exuberant crowds when they disembarked in San Juan. The unit was deactivated. However, the 65th was destined to live on as a military unit long after Korea. In February 1959, the regiment was transferred to the National Guard. The events at Outpost Kelly and Jackson Heights were only a temporary stain on the record. The contributions of the Borinqueneers had lasting impacts on the Army and Puerto Rico. The success of the Borinqueneers provided an opportunity for Puerto Rico to prove the country was politically mature and ready for self-determination. As historian Dr. Harry Frankie Rivera writes, Puerto Rican military officers and many soldiers saw the war as an opportunity to prove they were as good as or better than their continental counterparts, and thus their participation became a fight for equality at the most personal level. That opportunity to prove they were as good as their continental counterparts came to fruition with the ratification of a new Puerto Rican Constitution. The new Constitution, written and approved by the Puerto Rican Constitutional Convention, was ratified by Congress and signed by President Truman on July 3, 1952. The Constitution gave the island Commonwealth status, a new structure of government on the island, and a specified and extensive Bill of Rights. The momentum for change and the enthusiastic support for the new Constitution was supported by Puerto Ricans' participation in the Korean War. The drafting and passing of the Constitution marked the first time since the territory's acquisition by the United States that Puerto Ricans were directly responsible for shaping the governing structures placed upon them. While the court-martial sentences of the Borinqueneers were eventually overturned or communicated to time served, many felt that their distinguished record during the Korean War was tarnished as a result. In 2000, 2 years prior to the 50th anniversary of the Korean War, family members of the 65th Infantry requested that the Secretary of the Army initiate a historical review, focusing on the actions of the 65th during the period of September to October 1952. The Secretary of the Army agreed, and the Center of Military History undertook the review. The review declared that between September 1950 and December 1951, the 65th Regular Army Regiment established a reputation as one of the 3rd Infantry Division's best and most dependable formations. It was well led, well trained, and highly motivated. The review found that rather than a single cause, the challenges at Outpost Kelly and Jackson Heights were dependent on a number of factors at both the Army and the division level. These problems included a shortage of officers and non-commissioned officers, a rotation policy that removed combat experienced leaders and soldiers and made sustained training impossible, tactical doctrine that resulted in high casualties, an artillery ammunition shortage, and declining morale. At the division level, poor leadership and a command environment guilty of ethnic and organized prejudice. For the soldiers of the 65th, as well as the people of Puerto Rico, the results of this report were an important piece in restoring the regiment's honor. According to the review, the heartbreak at Kelly and Jackson Heights was a culmination of influences that was simply too great for the men of the 65th to bear, and did not reflect on the individual character of the men in the regiment. A few years later, the Borinqueneers were awarded the highest expression of national appreciation for distinguished achievements and contributions, the Congressional Gold Medal. President Barack Obama signed the legislation for the medal on June 10, 2014. The bill marked the first time a Hispanic military unit and a Korean War unit were awarded a Congressional Gold Medal. In 2016, representatives of the 65th Infantry were presented with a Congressional Gold Medal at a ceremony at the U.S. Capitol. At the ceremony, then Speaker of the House Paul Ryan asked the audience, "Would you fight for a country who discriminated against you? It takes a certain caliber of man to do that." I hope during this history talk you were able to learn more about the Borinqueneers. They fought valiantly in the face of prejudice, discrimination, and segregation from within the military. Their courage and loyalty left an imprint on the military and spurred pride and change at home. For more information about our programs and the museum, visit our website.